Chapter 9. Corbin. 5 days later, Zara and the kids got up early and packed all their stuff into a 7-seat people carrier. A tearful Joshua had to be pacified with the promise of presents before they set off towards Bristol in the southwest of England. 10 miles shy of the city itself, the sat-nav told Zara to pull off the motorway at the next junction and take the second exit from the roundabout. After drifting past a line of superstores and a housing estate that had spawned around the motorway, the land opened out into fields, with tall hedgerows blocking in the sides of the twisting A-road. Kyle wound down his window to feel the benefit of the country air, only to close it seconds later as the car filled with a pungent blast of manure. "Phew!" Lauren gasped as she wafted her hand in front of her face. "Oh, my eyes are watering! That's worse than having to use the bog after James." "I think," Zara said, as she ignored the sat-nav's instruction to take a left, "if we take the next road in, we'll still reach the village, but we'll get a glimpse of the Malaric laboratory on the way." "It won't take much longer, will it?" James asked. "I'm busting for a piss." 2 or 3 minutes, Zara said. "I can pull over if you're really desperate." James shook his head. "It'll hold for another 10 minutes. "Take the first safe opportunity and make a U-turn," the sat-nav said in its politely synthesized voice. Zara leaned across the dashboard and switched the navigation screen off. She'd visited the area while preparing for the mission and knew her way around. "This is the one," she said, as she slowed up for a tight turn. The direction sign pointed towards the village of Corbin Copse, half a mile. But as soon as they were around the bend, a very uncountry-like sight came into view. All the hedges had been replaced by tall concrete sections, topped with barbed wire and video cameras. Reflective yellow signs had been placed along the roadside by Avon Police. No stopping or loitering, 10 miles per hour slow, and drivers entering Malaric research premises lock windows and doors now. Zara obeyed the order to slow down, giving the kids a chance to view the carnage along the grass verge. Tons of litter and sodden placards abandoned by protesters, who'd also daubed thousands of slogans on the concrete walls. As the car rounded a slight bend and approached the entrance, the road turned into abstract art, thickly layered with streaks of red, blue, and yellow paint that protesters had aimed at vehicles entering or leaving the research facility. James recognised the location from an archived Sky News report he'd watched in Zara's office. It had shown a battle between police, Malaric security guards, and more than 100 protesters, chanting, hurling objects at cars, and trying to batter down the front gates. A few protesters did manage to force their way inside the laboratory compound and smashed more than 100 windows before they were arrested. But there wasn't much action on this particular Friday lunchtime. The scene outside the corrugated metal gate was subdued. 2 police officers in yellow bibs stood guard, and more sat around in a porta cabin across the road. The protest was confined to an area marked out with crowd barriers 50 metres from the entrance. It consisted of 3 middle-aged women and an elderly man. They sat in deck chairs, eating sandwiches and sharing a flask of coffee, while their placards rested against the wall behind them. A banner painted on bed sheets had been tied to the police's metal barriers. "Hoot to stop the suffering." These protesters were some of the people Zara and the kids would be getting to know over the coming weeks. So she waved out of her window and gave a good blast on the horn. The 4 protesters smiled and waved back. Zara picked up speed once they were past the entrance, and another few hundred metres brought them to a miniature roundabout, with the white cottages at the edge of Corbin Copse facing towards them. As they pulled up, a Land Rover that had been following close behind cut onto the opposite carriageway and squealed to an aggressive halt alongside them. The driver looked 20-ish and wore dirty blue overalls, suggesting a morning spent working on one of the surrounding farms. "Why don't you piss off back where you came from?" he shouted. Zara was startled by the outburst. "Pardon me?" "You heard," he shouted. "Bloody grockles, coming up here to gawp. You've seen it now, so turn around and sling your hook." James opened the electric window beside his head and gave the young driver a two-fingered salute as he sped off. "Up yours, you hick." "What was that in aid of?" Lauren asked. Zara explained as she cut over the centre of the roundabout, turning right into the village. "The locals don't like protesters. I mean, living out here in the middle of nowhere and suddenly finding that you've got hundreds of demonstrators and the TV news turning up on your doorstep twice a week." The car headed up a steep hill, through a main street that consisted of a pub set in a large garden and a strip of shops. Except for a convenience store on the corner, the shops had all been converted into homes. Beyond Main Street lay two modern housing developments where most villagers actually lived. But Zara pulled onto the driveway of a detached cottage without leaving what the locals called the Old Village. The tiny front garden was overgrown and the exterior was shabby, but it would only have taken some pruning and a lick of paint to make it fit the picture postcard image of an English cottage. "Man, what a hole," James said as he stepped through the front door and caught a lungful of musty air before bolting upstairs to find the toilet. "Must have been built by hobbits," Kyle said, lowering his head to avoid ceiling rafters as he dumped his suitcase on the carpeted floor of the pokey living room. "The owner wasn't keen on renting to a family with kids," Zara said. "We ended up buying her out because this location is just perfect. You can cut through the fields at the back and be at Malaric's front gate within 5 minutes. And some of the protesters drink in the pub down the road. The downside is that we've only got 3 bedrooms." "Bags not sharing," Kyle and Lauren both shouted as James came back from the toilet with wet hands. "No towel," he explained as he wiped them on his tracksuit bottoms. "2 of us have got to share," Kyle said. "Great," James said sourly. He realised he had no chance of getting a room to himself because he could share with his sister or he could share with another boy, but Lauren and Kyle couldn't share with each other. "I don't know what you lot are complaining about," Zara said. "I've got to share a bed with Ryan Quinn." James burst out laughing. "Oh, and he's gonna be horny after 3 years in prison." "Not funny, James," Zara said stiffly. "I've had a king-size bed put in that room, and I've made it clear to Ryan that if so much as a finger crosses the middle, I'll have his nuts in a jam jar."